Hi, since you're there, Gary, if you could just do the usual sound check for me, make sure everything's working at your end. Hello. And if you can see the picture and hear me, usual comment in the live chat. And I will see you all at 12:30. That's 14.5 minutes time. See you then. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ian's Studio Live, the 86th edition, and I'm back in the studio. It's really, really good to be back here after the last few weeks doing live streams from strange places and or not doing them at all due to ill health. So thank you for joining me tonight. It's great to be back, and hopefully I've got a good show for you tonight. I'm quite excited about tonight's show because I'm going to be teaching something that, how can I put it? It's something that I've struggled to find a way to explain and teach for a long time. I'm preparing it for tonight's live stream. I think I finally found the way to explain what I need to explain regarding spot metering, because I am absolutely convinced that most people don't use it right or don't understand how to use it. It's certainly something that it took me a long, long time to get my head round when I first came across it. And hopefully the explanation I'll give tonight you will find helpful, and hopefully it will help your photography. So, right, let's get going, shall we? On tonight's show, well, as I say, it is great to be back here live in the studio. I've got my usual 2 lots of image feedback, those sent via email, those sent or those I've obtained from the Facebook group, and I'll give feedback on both of those 2 short sessions. And my main topic for tonight is all about exposure modes on your camera, how they work, what the differences are between them, and very specifically how to use spot metering. I really want to go through that because I think it's a skill that can really make a difference to your photography. And it's certainly something that I don't use it enough, I don't think, but the times I do stop and think about using it and take the time to use it, it can really improve the images that I create. So I want to go through that. And of course, I'll finish off as ever by announcing my image of the week. So stay tuned to the end to find out if it's yours. Right, as ever, we're interactive. We've got the live chat going on here, so do say hello in the chat. And I've just seen a couple of extra names pop up there that I didn't have a chance to greet in the chat. So hi Bernard, good that you could join me here in the studio again. And yes, Bernard, it really is a green screen behind me. Bernard was in the studio earlier this week. I was doing a one-to-one training session with him, and he thought the brick wall that I have behind me here in the studio was genuine. It's not. It's all done by the power of the laptop. It's all green screened on there. So what's actually behind me is a green screen, and one of these days I ought to create a button where I can turn everything off and you can just see the raw camera feed. Unless, can I do it on here? Yeah, there you go. That's what's actually behind me. It's just a big green screen. That's all the camera sees of me. So everything else is fake, I'm afraid. It's all generated by the computer. Right, let's go back to how we should be. That's better. I've got my wall back. I've got my PowerPoints back. We can carry on. Yeah, and hi, Walter, as well. Thanks for the image that you sent in. I'll be talking about that shortly. It is interactive, as I say, so do chat along in the live chat. Chat with each other. Make comments on what I'm saying. Ask questions, and I will try to answer them as we go through. So let's get started with some feedback. I'm going to head over to Lightroom, and we're going to look at the images sent in by email. Oh, wrong set. Oh, right. Okay, just a minute. Previous import. Go to folder in library. That's the ones I want. So email here. Right. So I've had two people send me images, Gary Platt and Walter Reynolds. I'm going to actually start at the end with Walter's image. It's straight out of camera, and let's have a look at the shooting data on this. And the shooting data in the EXIF is, this is ISO 40,000, and this is the reason Walter sent it to me, just to really show how good. Right, we've got a little bit of noise in there, which is not surprising at 40,000, but this is a 1DX Mark III. Now, I'd be pretty pleased with that kind of resolution and that amount of noise at 40,000 on there. We can improve on that, because if we go into develop and go to detail, we can do a little bit of noise reduction. You see, we've got absolutely zero noise reduction on here. First of all, I can't actually see any colour noise on there, but we've got that little bit of luminance noise. So I'm just going to bring this up, and I'm looking at the background, looking for the point where it sort of disappears in the background, because that's the bit I want to clean up. So I'm going to go up to about there, and I think we're getting there. I could do with a little bit more contrast in there, try and bring back the detail in the feathers. That's not bad. Let's have a look at a before and after with that. Before, after. And that detail has brought out a little bit of the information. Oh. Yeah, we've lost a little bit of the detail in the feathers, looking at it on there. So let's see if the sharpening can help bring that back. Now, I think you possibly know the methods for sharpening on here. The way to do it is we bring the amount up, probably about halfway I usually start with, radius up a little bit on there, starting to see that detail on there, a little bit, play around with the detail mask, just a little bit, that's got most of it, but it's sharpened up the noise, which we don't want. This is where masking comes in. If I hold the Alt key as I move this up, what we can see now is black hides, so the sharpening only applies to the white areas. So we bring this up until it's just the edges showing. So something like that. You see, now we've got the smooth background, smoothish, and yet we've got the sharpening around the edges on there. So the whole effect of that, both noise and sharpening, we can toggle on and off. That's without, and that's with. Now, I don't know how clear that is on the video, but certainly on my screen, the background makes a great deal of difference, and I'm not losing quite as much detail from the noise reduction in the feathers on there. So we've got that. The other thing I would tend to do with something like this is I'd give it a little bit of a crop in to probably somewhere like that, which I think is looking lovely on there, and maybe just a little bit of adjustment on here. We've got a bit of scope in the blacks, so I'll bring the blacks down just a fraction on there. I would bring up the clarity just a bit as well. Let's see what that's done. Yeah. And I think just a tweak down on the highlights was a little bit of blown out on there. So I go with something like that. Now, Do I want a bit more vibrance? I would probably try giving it just a little bit of vibrance in there. So before and after, just a little minor tweak to it. But that is a lovely shot, Walter, on there, and one to be proud of. I mean, shot at 784. Yeah, so 1 point. I'm suspecting 400mm at times 1.4 on there to get that. That doesn't make sense. Hang on. That's my calculator. Just a tick, because I'm not believing the maths here. So 400 times 1.4 is fine. You can't possibly be on a full frame sensor then. I was convinced I thought the 1DX was full frame. Clearly not on there. That is really interesting. Right, anyway, it's a lovely shot. And as you can see, we can now see the detail on there. A little bit of noise crept back into the background on it, but I'm not working with the raw file. I'm just working with a TIFF on this. If I had the actual raw file, there's probably a little bit more I could do with it. But there we go. Okay, now going back to the other images. We have a whole load here from Gary, all from Venice. Now, I'm just going to try something, see whether this works. No, not that one. Yeah, I'm using the Impromptu Slideshow function, which is Control-Enter, and that should do a lovely slideshow of the selected images. And it's a nice way just to be able to show a set of images here. Now, I'm really loving this set, Gary, from Venice. And one of the things I really like about it is that most of the images are in colour. That one's black and white, obviously. But I was expecting, when I saw that you'd sent me 10 images from Venice, I was expecting them to be black and white, because most of the ones I think you've sent me in the past have been. But this set worked really well together. And the detail in the masks, they're lovely and sharp. Yeah, it's done the whole lot. It's not just the selected ones then, it's all that's in the folder on there. But yeah, it's a lovely set of images. I particularly liked this one because of the context of it, that we've got the obviously Venice behind with the figures looking. Now, rather than, I would have preferred this person to be looking into the frame rather than looking out. That's personal preference on there. And if I wanted to change one thing, I'd probably get rid of the pigeon, because it is drawing my eye. I know they're quite iconic of the location, but it does feel as though it's drawing my eye a little bit. Another one I particularly like is this. It feels like a death mask character, but I love the orange sky behind. I don't know how much of that has been added in post-production, but I think it works really well. I'd do a couple of things with this, Gary. I would crouch down and shoot much lower for two reasons: to give a little bit more space at the bottom, and to put the figure higher in the frame, so that horizon isn't going through the head, that maybe it's going just a little bit below, perhaps shoulder height through there, by crouching down on that one. I don't think I can really go through every single one here. I think that the black and white one I have talked about in the past. This one, again, love the eye contact on there. Love the fact that it just sort of fills the frame on it. I do wonder, again, it's a personal thing. I just wonder whether that kind of crop works, just moving it off, moving the person off to one side with it might be just a minor improvement on there. It's personal preference, to be perfectly honest with you, on that. So those, I think, are the strongest images in the set on there. So well done, Gary, and thank you for sharing them with us. Right, okay. Let's have a look at some of the chat as I've come back over here, because this explains a few things that's going on. Right, okay. Richard's saying that he's trying out DxO denoise on his images. Try it free for 30 days. Better than Topaz. It's good. Good to know. Richard was asking if it was a male chaffinch in the image. I don't know, Richard. You're the wildlife photographer. You tell me. Walter saying that he shot at 40,000 ISO, yeah, 400mm, and this is the bit I hadn't got twigged, a 1.4 built-in extender plus another 1.4 extender. That would give us the figures. He's even done the maths on there to prove it. So that explains why I was thinking that's full frame. I'm sure that's full frame, but the maths didn't work out. But now it does. So understand what's going on. Right. Thank you for the explanation, Walter, on there. Right. Let's move along. One thing just to say, Gary did include a message with his Venetian images, which I think is worth reading out. He says, Venice Carnival. I looked at some of the images I took at the 2019 Venice Carnival and pulled out a few images. If anyone ever thinks of going to Venice, I think about it. I've never managed it. Gary says, I've got plenty of tips and hints about how to get the most out of your trip because it's well worth it. But if you don't know where the events and gatherings take place, you can miss some wonderful photographic opportunities. Just DM, direct message me, and I'll happily pass on the information. So if anyone's going to Venice, get in contact with Gary, and he'll provide you with some hints and tips on that. So thank you for that, Gary. Some fantastic shots in there. Right. So my usual appeal at this point. Please subscribe, like and share. If you're not subscribed, please do so. Please hit the like button. There's 9 or 8 of you watching. Please go and hit the like button on there, because only 4 of you have done so far. My newsletter link for it is down below, as is the link for the Facebook group. If you're not a member of the Facebook group, please consider joining that, because that's where a lot of the conversation carries on during the week on there. Right. So let's move on to our main topic for the night, which is all about exposure modes. Excuse me. My voice is a bit stronger than it was last week, but it's still not quite 100%, as you can probably hear. So forgive me for that. Right, we're looking at metering within the camera and exposure modes on there. So we are effectively using what's called reflective metering, as opposed to incident metering, which you would do with a light meter. Reflective metering measures the light reflected by the subject back to the camera position. Occasionally you can get handheld light meters that do it, but they are less common on there. But all in-camera based metering is reflective. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And all modern cameras have some form of built-in light metering on there. Now, let's just talk about how reflective meters or cameras actually see the world. Reflective light from a bright object is much more intense than light off a dark object. Fairly obvious, you might say so. If I was wearing a white shirt, it would reflect more light than the black shirt. Well, black shirt with the yellow bees on it that I'm currently wearing. And that's fairly obvious, isn't it? But the camera doesn't know that. It can't tell the difference whether the light that's being bounced back comes from a white subject or a black subject or something in between. It just doesn't know. All it knows is there is an amount of light hitting the sensor. So it has to make an assumption. And that assumption is that the light coming back is from a mid-grey object. And it's important to know that the camera is assuming it's halfway between black and white, which is when 18% of the light is reflected back. So we sometimes refer to this as 18% grey, or perhaps a little bit more commonly these days, mid-grey on there. Now, is this a reasonable thing to assume? Well, you've got to assume something, but yeah, basically it is fairly reasonable because most images have a good range of brightnesses, which would all sort of equate down to this mid-grey if you average them all out. It's also the most common, it's a common brightness for common subjects. So a lot of common items are quite close to mid-grey. So grass, plants, Caucasian or Mediterranean skin tones, general brickwork, etc. So it's a fair assumption that if we assume that, you're not going to be too far off the case. So how do you use reflective metering? Again, just in case anyone doesn't know this or doesn't understand it, the way you use metering in your camera is you set two of your values, typically the ISO and either your aperture or shutter, then you meter for the remaining value, and cameras not only meter it, but they actually do set the final value, the remaining value for you. So if you're in aperture priority mode, it will meter for the shutter speed and set it for you so that you can then create your image. So because of that 18% grey, that mid-grey assumption, it works okay most of the time, but the camera can get fooled and it's not terribly accurate sometimes. And it's easy to fool the camera. It's less likely to fool the camera if you know and understand what the camera's doing at any given time. So let's look at the different metering modes that are available, the different ways that the camera can measure this light that's being thrown back at it from the subject. And there are four main metering modes in your camera. They are evaluative, or if you're a Nikon user, it's matrix. I don't know what the likes of Sony and Panasonic call it. I think they might call it grid, but please forgive me if I've got that wrong. Maybe the users of Panasonic and Sony and the like can tell me in the live chat on there. We've got center weighted, which is quite an old method, partial metering and spot metering. Let's go through each of those and let me explain what they're doing and a few things you may or may not be aware of about them and some of the traps you could fall into with them. And then I'm going to spend a little while just teaching how to use spot metering, because as I said early on, I think a lot of people don't fully understand how to use spot metering. So let's start with evaluative or matrix or grid or whatever you want to call it. Your image that the camera sees is divided into a pattern that could be at least 32 or more areas. So it's divided into this grid, and each of those little areas are measured. The light is measured individually for each of those squares or areas on there. Then the camera takes each of those, the value for the light from each of those squares, and throws it through an algorithm that's on the chip to work out an overall value. And that algorithm is aware of things like dark borders, it's aware of arrangements of light and dark to try and give you the best exposure it can calculate on there. Now, something you may or may not be aware of, and that is on some cameras, not all, the algorithm may also take into account where your focus point is at the point it is calculating the exposure. Now, it's worth knowing that because of understanding at what point you calculate your exposure in evaluative mode. By default, on most cameras, the half press of the shutter release will lock your focus. When you complete the shutter release, at that point, the camera calculates the exposure. So that's for most cameras, but that's not necessarily always the case. For example, with my camera, I have it set up that a half press of the shutter release will lock my exposure because I have my focusing on buttons on the back of the camera on there. So it's important to understand what your camera is doing to get the best to get the best value out of this algorithm. So just be aware of that. All I can say is check your manual to find out what your camera does. By default, it's probably doing the thing that's likely to work best with your algorithm. But if you are a bit of a tech nerd like I am and want to know what your camera's doing, look it up on there. I've got to say about evaluative and matrix is these algorithms are pretty good. They can be fooled, but they are pretty good. And most of the time, I work with my camera in evaluative mode. I just leave it on there and forget, unless I've got a good reason to take it out of that mode. And there are good reasons for taking your camera out of those modes, mainly to use spot metering, as we will see as we go through on that. So if you're unsure about what mode you should be in, go with evaluative stroke matrix stroke grid stroke whatever it's called on the other cameras on there, because that is probably the mode which will give you the best results. So let's have a look at the other remaining three. The next one that does get used a fair bit, and I see a lot of people leaving their camera on this mode, and that's center weighted. Now, center weighted is quite an old mode. It's what the default was on cameras before we had evaluative modes. And what it does, the camera just looks at the image as a whole and measures it, but it gives a lot more emphasis to what is in the middle of the image at the point it is calculating the exposure. And remember that it's at the point it's calculating the exposure. So if your subject isn't in the center when it's calculating the exposure, this mode may get confused because it's giving priority to what's in the middle. So what is this good for? Well, if you've got a subject against a bright background, so suppose you've got someone standing in front of a window and you want to make sure you get the exposure right for them, your center weighted, the camera will give emphasis on the middle there. But it is a more dated version of the evaluative matrix mode. So because of that, I would tend not to use it. There's a better one for against a bright background or anything like that, but it's there as an option. It does cope reasonably well, but I would say not quite as good as evaluative on there. And it can get confused if the, as I say, if the subject isn't in the center of the image. Next, we've got partial. Now, partial may or may not be on your camera. Partial and spot don't seem to appear on every camera. The more advanced the camera, the more likely you are to get it. Now, partial is basically the center circle. If your camera's got a center circle as you look through the viewfinder, basically it's just considering that area, it's measuring the light in that area and using that to calculate the exposure. So it's just using the center of the image rather than center weighted, which is using the whole image but giving a priority to the center. This typically only measures that 9% of in the middle of the image. And you may find this circle in your viewfinder which shows you the area that's being used. This is really good for metering a dark subject against a light background, but only if your subject is in the middle of the frame or you're going to lock your exposure and then recompose the image on there. Then we come on to spot metering. Spot metering uses just a single spot, the equivalent of a single focus point. It's reading from a very precisely defined small area of the image. Not every camera will have this option on it, but if it does, it's really powerful because you can really get the exposure from a known point within the frame. And it's typical about 1% of your frame when you use it. Now, I always used to say, this is the center point. But I was reading up in preparation for this, and I discovered that there are now cameras where this will follow the focus point. Now that may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing. Just check your manual, find out for your own camera. For my R5, I don't believe it does follow the focus points on it. For my 5D Mark III, I don't believe it does either. But I know some of the more recent, I think the non-R range of Canon cameras do have the option for it to follow the focus point. So check with your camera. Walter, for example, with your 1DX. I think there's a possibility that with the 1DX, spot focusing might follow. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I have a feeling it might be one of the cameras that does. So do check your manual on there to find out. So with spot metering, if your subject is not in the center point and your metering is fixed on that center point, then you will have to move the center point to the item you want to meter, fix your exposure, and then recompose to use spot metering. And I'll go through that process and give you a simulation of what you see through the camera viewfinder to try and explain this. So how do we spot meter a scene? For this explanation, I'm going to assume that the metering spot remains in the center and doesn't follow the focus point. It's the same principle if it does follow the focus point, but you just have to be aware of where it is. So I'm going to say it stays in the center for the purposes of explaining all this. And the images and graphics that I'm showing you are simulations rather than actual things. I've taken an image, I've overlaid graphics to show what you can expect to see through your viewfinder as you do this. And it gives me a way to explain what's going on. It's not a genuine, this is what I saw through the viewfinder as I was doing it. So let me start with looking at spot metering in manual mode. And I do strongly recommend manual mode for spot metering. I find this the easiest way to spot meter. It's the most natural way to do it, and it allows you to lock in an exposure. And if that exposure, if the light's not changing, once you've got it locked in manual mode, you can just keep shooting until the light or your subject changes on there. So I find this the easiest way to use spot metering. So here's our scene. We've got model Tatiana. So just some random settings on there. I'm in manual mode, and it just happens to be set to f5, 125th of a second at ISO 100. And it's actually showing up as being the little caret marker at the bottom is against the 0, which you would normally say is, well, hey, that is correctly exposed. Except that it isn't. The spot is over the spot should be over a mid-tone in the scene, and it's over a point that isn't quite a mid-tone. So it's given me a value. I've got a value in there. The caret is set to 0, but the subject is dark. And the reason it's dark is because that spot is not over a mid-tone. So what do I do? Well, the way you do it is you then temporarily recompose your image to put that spot over a mid-tone. Caucasian or Mediterranean skin is approximately a mid-tone. So in this case, I've chosen to put the spot on Tatiana's cheek. And now I've got the spot there. What happens? That caret moves over to the left, but because I'm in manual mode, the settings themselves don't change, but the pointer tells me that, oh, I need to move out of the way, that the image is actually 2/3 of a stop underexposed based on measuring the light reflected back from Tatiana's cheek. So what do I need to do? Well, what I need to do is change my settings. Remember, manual mode, it's down to me to change it. So if I open up my aperture from f5 to f4, that's 2/3 of a stop, what would happen? Well, this is what happens. The image got just that fraction brighter. I hope you could see that on the image. The caret moves up to 0, which tells me that the exposure value, the exposure settings of f4 125th of a second ISO 100 will correctly expose this image based on Tatiana's skin tone on there, and that will give me the correct, that's the correct exposure reading. However, this isn't the composition I want. So I've changed the settings, I've opened up the aperture, and the image is now correctly exposed, but my composition isn't correct on there. But I have locked in, because I'm in manual mode, the settings that I need. So I can now quite happily recompose the image, which I've done here. I've recomposed the image. Notice that the settings don't change. I'm in manual mode. They are manually chosen by me, and they were correct when the spot was over Tatiana's cheek. Now I've recomposed the image. Where's the spot? Well, it's over a dark part of the image. I'm measuring the light from there. That's come back at 1 2/3 stops underexposed. But does that matter? No, it doesn't, because I'm not bothered about trying to expose that as being a midtone. I want her skin to be correctly exposed, and I've set the values for that. So yes, once you recompose, you would expect that caret, that pointer, to move off to one side. So don't be fooled by it, the fact that it does move when you recompose after you've locked in on there. So we've got the correct settings, and those will remain the same. So now, once I've done that, so long as Tatiana remains in the same light, so long as she is the subject that I am photographing, my settings are locked in there. I don't have to redo my exposure each shot. I can just keep shooting so long as the light doesn't change. Just be aware that the caret may move back and to, but that's based on where the spot is underneath in the actual image. In this case, it's in the darker section, therefore it moves down. And I've got a question that's come in on chat to do with this, so let me bring that up. Walter saying, you can assign spot metering on the focus point you have selected. It's a config option. Right, that's in answer to my question about whether his camera, which was the 1DX, yeah, you can assign it to the active focus point rather than the center point. Which one you use, Walter, is entirely your choice on how you work with it. Right, back to the PowerPoint slides. So that's how you do it in manual mode. How would you do this? Use spot metering in aperture priority mode. Right, excuse me. Now in aperture priority mode, the caret will not move at the bottom because that is actually our exposure compensation indicator, and we're going to do this without exposure compensation. We are just going to use spot metering on there. So that caret will always remain at 0 on there. We've got a, we're in aperture priority mode. We've fixed ISO and we've fixed aperture at f4 ISO 100, and the camera will calculate a shutter speed for that. Now the spot, as you can see, is currently over a bright bit of background, which means the camera has calculated an exposure of 1/200th of a second, but that is a bit fast for this because it's brighter than Tatiana's skin tone, so she is underexposed because of where that spot is. So what we need to do is, again, we need to temporarily recompose our image to put the spot on the skin tone. So we've got it on Tatiana's face. The camera now, because it's constantly recalculating the shutter speed, because you're in aperture priority mode, or every time you half press your shutter release or whatever, it recalculates it now down at a speed of 1/125th of a second. So the image has got brighter, it's now correctly exposed, but hang on a minute, this isn't the composition that we want. And if I recompose, we move that dot, therefore we lose our exposure, don't we? Well, yes, so the solution is to use exposure lock. And exposure lock is the start button on your camera by default. So you press that and you will typically get the star lighting up somewhere in your viewfinder to tell you that exposure lock has been enabled. So you've got that on there. Once you press that button. So now you can, well, and there, the back of one of the cameras, that's the star button that we're looking for. Now we can recompose the image. And look what happens now. Having recomposed it, the caret doesn't move. Remember, that's exposure compensation. The image retains that 125th of a second and that the exposure that we calculated. So we've got the correct exposure. It's nice and bright on there, even though the spot is over a dark area. We've locked the exposure from when the spot was on our subject's face on there. And as I say, the caret never moves because that is exposure compensation. So don't be fooled by that, but just remember that you do need to lock your exposure once you've got it, once you've put your spot over a mid-tone on there. So the next question, I suppose, is how do you cope with the spot metering a scene that hasn't got a mid-tone in it? How do you do it? What do you do? Well, if it doesn't have that mid-grey point, skin tone, brickwork or grass in there, you need to find a point that you estimate is a known number of stops away from mid-tone. So pick something that you think is going to be 1 or 2 stops away from mid-grey, either brighter or darker. And if this all sounds a little bit familiar to you, we did the other week, I looked at Ansel Adams' zone system. And this is where we're using effectively the zone system. So the zone system maps to the stops under and over exposed of exposure compensation. So our mid-grey, zone 5, is that skin tone that we've got. It's the grass, it's brickwork, it's things like that. However, let's take the following, just to say, if you didn't see the live stream about the zone system, it's number 79, so go and have a look at that one. So let's assume this is the scene we're photographing. I haven't got a mid-tone in there, I'm going to have to choose something else on it. So there's nothing in this scene I can use as a mid-tone on there. The current settings are just fairly random settings, perhaps from the previous shot. The spot is over a random bit of the scene, and it's saying with those settings, yeah, it's going to be 2 stops underexposed on there if that was a mid-tone. But it's not a mid-tone, so it doesn't really mean anything to us. It's not helping us with this scene. So what I need to do is to choose something within that scene that I can meter off. And I'm going to choose, if I can get my pointer on it, I'm going to choose this area up here, which I think is 1 stop under under a mid-tone. So in terms of Ansel Adams and his zone system, it would be zone 4 as opposed to zone 5. So what do? Well, I temporarily zoom in on that area to get my focus point over that section. And I can effectively then use that to take a meter reading. So I put my focus point over there, not changing any of the settings, my my spot for, I say focus point because it's one and the same in my camera, that spot over there, and it's telling me that actually that would be 3 stops underexposed if that was a mid grey. Well, I know it's not a mid grey on there. I'm estimating it's -1 stop, 1 stop below, or zone 4 on it. So now I know what it ought to be. I can then change my settings to get that caret to say -1, because I'm taking a decision that that point, that area, needs to be exposed as though it's 1 stop under mid grey. So by changing the aperture and by changing the shutter speed, both by 1 stop, I've moved the caret up from -3 to -1 on there. So that puts it in 1 stop below mid grey. And that is the settings that I need for the scene. I'm in manual mode, so they are effectively locked in. So I can then recompose my image to the composition that I want. So I do that, and notice what happens. The meter readings are locked in from when I took the reading. The caret moves up to +1. Why? Because that point is now over a bright part of the image. It's over the bright blue sky, 1 stop above mid grey on there. The settings don't change. I can ignore the fact that the caret has moved. I know I have metered the image based on that area of the scene that I've decided I want to be just 1 stop below mid grey on there. So I can then just take the shot, and again I can take other shots within that lighting. As long as the lighting doesn't change, I know that my camera is set for the correct exposure for those lighting conditions, and it's fixed. So that is how you would use spot metering to get an image correctly exposed. So I hope you found that helpful. Just to say, as ever, my live stream is sponsored this week by you. My thanks to everyone who has bought me a cuppa. I really appreciate it. And just to say, for anyone new watching this, if you are if you find these live streams helpful and you want to do something to contribute to keeping them online, then please consider buying me a cuppa through the link below. It's basically buy me a coffee, things that YouTubers use, except I don't drink coffee, so I had a different link set up. That's my link. And this week, cuppa has been brought to me, has been paid for by Paul Robnett. So cheers, Paul. Thanks for the cuppa. Really appreciate that. Right. What have we got in chat? I can see we've got something. We've got a question from Tim, who says, in manual exposure mode and using spot metering, whatever spot the central focus point is on, can you not intelligently estimate where you set the meter indicator, e.g. -1, and then take the shot? Yes, you can. You can do it like that. That's effectively what I was doing in that second example. You can do it like that. It's just most people tend to find it easier most of the time to find a grey area and then just get that to 0, because we know skin, grass, brick are mid areas, mid-tones, and the others are actually harder to estimate because our eyes don't record differences of brightness quite so easily. So it's easier to pick one of those known items and base on those. So skin tone, grass, or brick, because they are pretty much your mid-tones on it. That's the reason why I do it that way. But yes, you can do it the other way if you think you can estimate brightnesses. I'm not very good at it, and if you've ever seen the example online of the Rubik's Cube, which is a really scary one when you first see it, because it's a picture of a Rubik's Cube with two different colours on two different sides. And you know they're two different colours on the Rubik's Cube, and then you watch the video and everything except those two squares disappear, and you suddenly realise they are absolutely perfectly the same colour, because our eyes get fooled like that. At some point I need to do a session on don't believe your eyes, to explain those sorts of things. Right, okay, carrying on. Feedback. Let's have a look back in Lightroom at the Facebook images this week as we start to wrap up today. So, Lightroom, and I've got 7 images. Okay, so I'm going to start with this one from John Barton. I'm going to develop module with this. Actually, John, this is a really nice shot. Really like this one. I'd prefer it if the horizon wasn't quite in the middle on there, and you could have done something about that by crouching down a little bit. It's a nice black and white conversion. It's a nice sky, interesting subject on the 1/3 line. And I know I laid into you last week, but this one's a good one. And this is what I want to just emphasize with you. Think carefully about what you choose to show. I've said it before. I've chosen this one this week of your images because it is a good image, and I want to highlight, after highlighting a really poor one last week, I wanted to highlight one of your better images this week. So well done on there. Good shot. Right, Sonia, a woolly cattle. Interesting shot. I'm a little bit in two minds about this one, to be perfectly honest with you. I do find this bright area at the top distracting, and I can see you've done your best in post-production to darken it down and dull it down a little bit, but it's still pulling my eye away. Now, I don't know whether we can cheat this just a little bit on this one. I don't know whether we'd get away with something like that with it, which just removes a little bit of that sky from there. I don't know that works with it. Also, I do find the little flecks on it a little bit distracting, particularly the one round the nose with that. So it's an interesting shot. I think I've seen better work from you, Sonia, but thank you for sharing with it on there. I much prefer this one. You've got a nicer sky. It does draw the eye a little bit, but because it's nice bright blue, it's been darkened down a bit with a vignette. I don't find it quite as distracting. What's our subject here? Well, I would say it's this one, and framed by this. So I would say we might be able to just pull this in a little bit tighter onto this one. So something like that, I think, might be the better shot or the better crop with it on there. But it's removed a few distracting elements. The edge here wasn't adding much, and the extra horse I found a little bit distracting on that one. So nice shot. Thank you for sharing on that one. Andy, another one that's connected with one of Andy's YouTube videos. I think this is a 3-image stacked shot, long exposures stacked together. Nice image, nicely done with the stream and the flow on there. The stream acts as a lead-in with it. The horizon's nicely high up with it, with the bridge on 1/3 line. I find this one ticks all the right boxes, Andy. Really good image. Thank you for sharing it with us. Great shot. Ruskin, I say this every time, and I really, really, really wish you would send me your images via the email address feedback@ians-studio.co.uk because I want to give you better feedback than I'm able to from the Facebook images. This one is just a little bit underexposed on it. I think it just needs brightening up like that. I love the context of this, the location that you've chosen, that you've got the two guys to go out into the water, so you've got their reflection. If I had a slight nitpick on it, I'd have liked to have tried to find a position where their reflection wasn't chopped off at the neck on there, but that's just a minor nitpick on there, and just that increase of the exposure. Because as with a lot of your images, Ruskin, they're underexposed, and again, I could address that much better if I had the original images sent to me via email. So again, please, 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 let me have the original images, and I can really help you a lot more than I'm able to from just the Facebook versions on there. Another one from Sonia. I like the reflection on it. I think what this lacks is some interesting foreground with it. I'd be tempted to try and have somebody sitting on the bank here looking into the scene, or if there wasn't somebody around with you that you could ask to sit there, maybe stick the camera on tripod, self-timer, and put yourself in the image, because I think that would help this particular scene. Other than that, it's well exposed. I like the reflections in it. I think it just needs that extra bit to it. Fred, thank you for sharing this. Now, I know this is straight out of camera, and I think it was either a point-and-shoot camera or a phone camera on there. Absolutely gorgeous light on here. You asked for some constructive feedback. The biggest suggestion I could make about this is the height at which you photograph. We've got this lovely dark background here, which I'm sure goes a little bit higher than the frame there. If you crouch down just a little bit more, you'd have ended up placing this more against a dark background, which would have really helped set it out more on there. Having done that, I would then be tempted just to crop in a little bit tighter on this. Maybe keep that in, maybe just bring that up a fraction, and the square crop there, and assuming it was higher up, it could be a little bit closer to the top of the of there, and have a bit more of that dark behind it. I think you've got a really nice image. But the light is wonderful. It's that lovely golden hour light. It's the light coming from behind. I would refer to this as a very theatrical lighting, that backlighting that we do so much in theatre, done here in nature. And so it's a lovely, the lighting is wonderful. The subject, I think, would look better with the darker background, but overall, not a bad shot for a straight out of camera on there. If I was doing anything in post-production, I'd probably just increase the contrast a little bit on it, or the clarity like that with it, but that's about it. I love the orange golden light with it. And I think, is that the last one? Yes, that's the last one from the set. So let's head back to PowerPoint and look at what's been going on in live chat on there. And the answer is not a lot since my last comment on there. So that just leaves me the member photo of the week to announce. And this week's member photo of the week comes from, I've actually decided I will go with John Barton's image. I thought it'd make a good banner image. I have had to do one extra thing to it, as you will see, and that is I've extended the bottom of the frame just a little bit. I've now got that horizon on the 1/3 level, which I talked about. We've got the shoreline on a 1/3 level, horizon 1/3 level. I've just added a little bit more gravel and there by cloning to extend it at the bottom. So good shot, well done, John. And I'll make the change very shortly on the Facebook group. So whose image will it be next week? Well, upload your images to the Facebook group during the week and it might be yours. So yeah, one final comment in the live chat from Richard, who says nice images everyone. Yeah, I agree with that on there. Now, next Sunday, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do next Sunday's live stream, but I want to look at simple studio lighting. Now, the ideal for this would be if I can find a friendly model to join me in the studio, and the live stream will be a live shoot that I'll go through with the model, showing you how I set up the lights in the studio for some basic portraiture lighting in there live. So that's what I'm hoping to do. If I can't find the model, I've got sufficient images and behind the scenes images to be able to do it from as a slideshow on there and to talk you through it. But ideally, I prefer to do it live to show you the effect on that. So please post images to the Facebook group this week. Please email images to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk. And if I am doing this as a live demo, then I will be recording my feedback session a little bit in advance. So do get your images in early this week, because possibly Friday I will be doing the recording of the feedback sessions for it, depending on whether I think I'm going to be doing the studio lighting live as a live stream. So thank you everyone for watching and joining me. It's been good to be back in the studio. My voice has just about lasted to the end. I've overrun very slightly by 7 minutes. My apologies as ever, but thank you for watching, and until next time, folks, thanks for watching and keep making great photos. See you all next Sunday. Bye for now.